So now we're going to take the last lesson a little bit further, and we're going to create some code that allows us to create multiple copies of a symbol in our library. And this can be very useful if you need to make a row of objects on the screen and you don't want to, of course, input code each and every single time, a code like this each and every single time, and reposition it if you want to create multiple objects in a row on your stage. So we can get started with that. If you need to reference the code that I'm working on here, you can open up the work file 0204 multiple movie clips, and that will give you the code, and you can reference that. But I think it'll be good for you to write it out from scratch, as we will be doing right now. So, continuing on from my last lesson's code, I'm just going to create some space between the two code blocks here. So, I'll add a space, and now I'm going to create what is called a for loop. A for loop is just a loop that will listen out for something of what we'll be defining. In other words, in this case, I'm going to create a loop that will say, okay, basically I want to create 5 rectangles in a row. So you need to listen out for the event where I have 5 rectangles. Once I have 5 rectangles, I need you to stop looping, is basically what we're going to be doing here. So we'll do for, and then parentheses, var, so we're creating a variable, and I equals 0. And that's going to be the first part of the variable. Semicolon will separate the next part, in which we'll say I is less than 5. And then a semicolon, and then finally I plus plus. And then we'll cap it off with a parentheses. What we're doing here is, first of all, I don't know why I put 1 when I said I was going to put an I, but you want it to be I equals 0, I less than 5, and then I plus plus. But what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, I is equal to 0, and we want I to be less than 5. And finally, I plus plus is adding I to itself. And all of this will make sense momentarily here when we write out the code. So now we need to go deeper. So let's create a bracket and hit enter. And now we're going to set up another variable. So var my rectangle 2, and the reason why I'm putting a 2 is because we already defined a variable as my rectangle above. And of course, we cannot have the same variable name for different variables, or else there's going to be problems. So just make sure that you keep them separate. Now, we'll have a very similar setup here to what you're probably familiar with. We're going to reference the the MC rectangle symbol in the library. And the reason for this is because we're just simply going to create copies of that symbol. You can reference a symbol multiple times in a program. Just again, as long as you define your variables differently, you could reuse a symbol from your library in many different ways, many different times in one program. So once you have defined that, our next step is to define the variables. So my rectangle 2. And we're going to create the X position. Now the code here, which is 90, and I'm just using 90 just because that's going to create an adequate space between the rectangles, times I plus 50. Basically space it apart and then move it 50 pixels each time it draws a new rectangle. That's what that code does. Next, my rectangle 2.y equals 350. And again, that can be anywhere you want it to be, as long as it's, positioned correctly on the stage where you want it to be positioned. And you could also switch this code around too. If you wanted the rectangles to be drawn vertically instead of horizontally, you could definitely do that as well by, taking this formula and sticking it right here. So now, after that, I'm going to resize our rectangles because I don't want them to be too big so they don't fit on the screen since we're making multiple instances of the rectangle. And actually, to save some time here, I'm going to highlight this code and use Control-C on my keyboard or Command-C if you're on a Mac. I'm on a PC, but you can use Command-C to copy if you're on a Mac. And then we'll just come down here and use Control-V to paste or Command-V if you're on a Mac. That will save us some time. So we'll do .scale_x equals 0.3. So basically, we're going to do a third of the size of how it is in the library. That's for the X positioning. We also need to do the Y scaling or positioning as well because we want it to be scaled proportionately. If we have these numbers different, we might have a squish effect or something of that nature, which might be something you want to do. But for right now, we just want to resize everything proportionately. And finally, we will do add child, my rectangle 2, and close that off. So now, if we test this movie, you can see that we now have 5 rectangles on the stage, or at least on the bottom. This rectangle right here is from the original code we did from the previous lesson, but this new code is showing up right here. And that is how you create multiple instances of a symbol on your stage.